It is said that beneath the marble bones of Rome, beneath the echoing heart of its grandest cathedral, there lies a silence too old to name. A silence heavy as stone, sacred as the breath between prayers, when the night folds itself over the city, when the bells sleep, and the doves settle on the dome, there are those who swear they can hear it. A faint sigh, as if parchment turned somewhere beneath the altar, in a place where candles no longer burn. Whispers tell of a hidden library sealed in the age of cardinals and kings, not a library of learning but of forgetting. A chamber built not to preserve memory, but to bury it, picture it. The nave of the cathedral at midnight, a sea of cold marble gleaming like frozen moonlight. A single lamp trembles before the altar, its flame thin, uncertain, as though afraid to disturb what rests below. Beneath it, under the carved stone where saints lie dreaming, a slab bears a faint seam, smooth to the touch yet out of rhythm with the rest of the floor. The story begins with a man who noticed that seam. He was an archivist, nameless, voiceless in history's account. One of those quiet keepers who tended the church's records by lamplight and dust. His world was paper, ink, and silence. He did not seek heresy. He sought order. But one evening, while cataloging an inventory of missing manuscripts, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of a page being turned from somewhere below. Once, then again. At first he thought it was memory, the echo of his own movements. But the rhythm was wrong. It was slower, older, patient like something reading by memory alone. He followed the sound to the altar, his candle trembling, the shadows long and restless. There he found the seam, a whisper of a line across the marble. It felt warm to the touch, as though something living pulsed beneath. For nights afterward he returned. Always at the same hour, always when the city slept. He began to dream of the place beneath the floor, of stairways spiraling down through centuries of dust, of shelves carved from rock and lined with books bound in leather as pale as bone. He began to dream of voices. Some say it was curiosity that drove him. Others believe the whisper below the altar called him by name, though none remember what that name was. In the archives he discovered faint notes written by monks long vanished, mentions of Bibliotheca Obscura, the Library of Shadows, a room of forbidden texts sealed by decree after the Council of Trent, a place where the church locked away every word that did not align with heaven's light. It was not blasphemy that filled those books, it was complexity. It was the gray between salvation and sin, and so they were buried. By candlelight he found the mechanism, a small keyhole hidden beneath the carved folds of an angel's robe, worn smooth by centuries of prayer. He did not possess the key, but he knew where to look. In the records of papal relics, one entry stood apart, Clavis Obscura, the key of the hidden. It was said to rest in a reliquary beside the skull of Saint Marcellus, a relic no one dared touch, for the saint was known to guard the secrets of silence itself. On the seventh night, when the moon hung low and red above Rome, the archivist unlocked the reliquary. He found the key waiting, small and iron-worn, cold as confession. He carried it to the altar, whispered a prayer he could not finish, and turned it within the angel's robe. The marble shifted with the sound of breath escaping stone. The air below was colder, older. It smelled of wax, of damp vellum, of the breath of extinguished candles. He descended a narrow stair that spiraled endlessly, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the hollow dark. The flame in his hand trembled, as though remembering something it once feared. At the base of the stair lay a door of oak and iron. Across it was carved a Latin phrase, Veritas non semper est lux. Truth is not always light. When he entered, the candle dimmed. The chamber revealed itself not as a room, but as a cathedral within the cathedral. Arches of black stone rising into endless dark, shelves upon shelves of chained books stretching beyond sight. Dust drifted like ash through the air, turning the light of his flame to gold. He touched the nearest book. The leather was smooth but pulsed faintly as though alive. The chain rattled softly, not in warning but in remembrance. On its spine was a title erased. Only the faint impression of letters remained, pressed into silence. He opened it. Inside were pages filled not with words but with symbols, spirals, stars, and eyes that seemed to look back. The ink shimmered faintly as though wet with memory. He turned the pages slowly, reverently, until the candle guttered. The sound he had heard before, the turning of unseen pages, now filled the air all around him. It came from every direction, from books that moved through untouched, whispering to one another in a language forgotten even by heaven. And beneath it all, another sound, the low hum of prayer, wordless and unending. The hum of those who once wrote these pages, whose names had been erased so completely that only their devotion remained. It is said the church once fought a war within itself, not with blade or banner, but with ink. A war of doctrine, of truth and silence. The archivist understood now what had been hidden. The library was a battlefield, a tomb for the defeated words. Here lay treatises on angels who fell not from grace, but from choice. Here gospels that spoke of a feminine light, of creation shared between sun and shadow. Here sermons that questioned the architecture of paradise, poems that dared to love both God and doubt. Each book was a wound bound in leather. Each chain a seal against rebirth. He felt the enormity of it. Not blasphemy, but grief. These were not enemies of faith. They were fragments of faith too vast to fit inside the church's walls. Some said the Vatican buried them to protect the faithful. Others whispered it was to protect God himself from seeing how many shapes his reflection had taken. The archivist moved through the aisles like a pilgrim, his candle burning lower, his breath a quiet psalm. He began to see faint frescoes painted along the walls. Images of saints with blurred faces, halos cracked, eyes open yet veiled. Each painting seemed to shift when the flame passed. At the chamber's heart he found an altar. Upon it a single book lay open. Its pages were blank, yet as he drew near, faint words began to appear, written in light and fading smoke. They were not written to him, but through him, as though the library had found its voice again in his presence. He read without sound, and in that silence, he felt every heartbeat of those who had written before. Their longing, their exile, their endless search for meaning within the vast hush of the divine. When his candle finally died, there was no fear, only the soft knowing that he was not the first, nor would he be the last. He left the chamber slowly, carrying nothing but memory, and yet, as he ascended the stair, the weight of centuries pressed upon his shoulders like vestments. The seam closed behind him with a sigh, the marble once again unbroken. In the morning, the cathedral stood as it always had, silent, radiant, holy. The priests walked above the hidden library unaware, the altar gleaming beneath the light of prayer. But those who passed close to the sanctuary claimed they felt warmth beneath the stone, like a pulse. The archivist vanished from the records. His desk in the Vatican archives was found undisturbed, save for one thing, a single iron key resting beside a candle burned halfway down, its flame still faintly alive. Some say he sealed the library once more to keep its secret safe. Others believe he never returned from it at all, that the hum beneath the cathedral floor is his prayer continuing, wordless, eternal, and still when the night grows deep in Rome, when bells falter and shadows breathe, some claim they can hear it, the turning of a single page beneath the altar, slow and patient, as if truth itself is still reading, waiting for the world to listen again. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was never meant to be forgotten, only remembered in silence and dreamed in sleep. It is said that in the misted hills of Umbria, where clouds drift like forgotten prayers and stone churches cling to the earth like memories, there once stood a monastery that had no sound. Its bell tower, cracked by centuries of waiting, hung motionless, a hollow mouth that had not sung in generations. Moss grew along its edges, birds nested where metal once rang, and the wind passed through its emptiness like a slow and endless sigh. The monks who lived there did not speak. Not to one another, not to God aloud. Their silence was not peace, and it was inheritance. A vow carved from command, not choice. They were the keepers of something older than prayer, something the church no longer spoke of but could not bear to erase. Each day they rose before dawn, their bare feet soft upon the stone, their faces bowed beneath the same gray hood. In the courtyard, dew gathered on the cold arches, catching the faintest touch of the waking light, as though the world, too, hesitated before breathing. It is said their silence began in the 13th century, when a decree was written and sealed in red wax. its words hidden even from those bound by it. The order was simple, though none could read it now, to guard in silence a truth not meant for mortal tongues. The first abbot, Saint Aurelius of Perugia, was said to have received it in a vision, a figure of light instructing him that words had grown too loud, that heaven could no longer hear through the noise of man. And so, his brothers took the vow and their voices vanished like smoke. Time passed and the world beyond the hills forgot them. Empires rose and fell. Popes were crowned and buried. Yet in this lonely monastery, time slowed to the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. The monks moved through their days like shadows guided by ritual. They tilled the soil in silence. They tended the vines. They copied ancient texts by hand, each letter a form of meditation. Even their chants had become wordless, long, low tones that rose like mist and dissolved before they reached the rafters. But silence, too, can grow heavy. It can begin to echo. Some say that in the later centuries the brothers began to hear things, faint voices in the stillness of night, the sound of whispering where no mouth moved. A breeze through the cloisters that carried half-formed words, the rustle of robes though all stood motionless. One monk, Brother Luca, wrote in his journal, though it was later burned, that he could feel the silence watching him, pressing against his skull like a second skin. That sometimes, when the candlelight flickered, he saw shapes forming on the walls, outlines of those who had once spoken, trying to remember what they had said. In those days, the silence was not absence. It was presence. It had become a thing alive. There are tales passed quietly through the nearby villages that one winter night a stranger sought shelter at the monastery's gate. A scholar, weary from travel, who had heard rumors of the Order of the Quiet. He was welcomed with bread and water, and though the monks never spoke, their hospitality was gentle. Yet as he dined in the refectory, he noticed something strange. The air itself seemed to hum, not with sound, but with vibration, as if each stone carried a note too low for human hearing. Unable to restrain his curiosity, the scholar explored the monastery after midnight. In the moonlight, he found himself drawn toward the chapel at its center, a small building without windows, its door carved with the image of a closed mouth. Inside, hundreds of candles burned low, their flames steady and unbothered by wind. The monks knelt around the altar, motionless. In their midst stood a reliquary made of black glass. The scholar leaned closer and saw that it was empty. Yet it was not the emptiness that frightened him. It was the sound that wasn't there. No breath, no rustle of cloth, no crackle of flame. Even his heartbeat seemed to pause. The silence was total, perfect. And in that perfection, he understood what they guarded. It was not a relic, not a scroll, not a name. It was silence itself, a sacred absence the church had once feared. For within it lay something greater than doctrine, stillness without command, faith without control. The scholar fled before dawn. He never spoke of what he saw. But those who met him afterward claimed he often turned suddenly, as if listening for something that was no longer there. Years drifted on. The order diminished. One by one, the monks returned to dust. Their silence endured. No bells told at their passing. No records marked their names. The monastery fell to ruin, its walls cracked by ivy, its cloister flooded by rain. Yet those who wander the Umbrian hills at dusk still say they can feel it. A quiet so deep it seems to lean toward them, to listen back. Sometimes travelers find themselves near the old tower, now leaning like a broken spine against the mist. They report hearing a faint melody carried by the wind, a single unbroken tone, neither human nor natural, trembling between sound and thought. When they turn, there is no one there, only the shifting fog, the moss-covered stones, and the feeling that something ancient has just exhaled. Perhaps the silence remains, still guarding what cannot be spoken. Perhaps it was never a punishment, but a prayer, a bridge between what is said and what is truly meant. There are no monks now, only the memory of their discipline. But sometimes, in the moments before dawn, when even the birds are still, the air seems to hold its breath, and if you stand in that quiet long enough, you may hear what they once protected, the sound that lies beneath all others, the still heartbeat of the divine. It is not a voice. It is not a word. It is the space where truth hides when men grow too loud. And if you listen closely, very closely, You might hear the faint echo of robes moving down a forgotten corridor, a candle being lit by unseen hands, and the hush of eternity folding once more around a secret that has no name. Some say the silence was their burden, others say it was their salvation, but perhaps it was simply their way of listening to God after he had stopped speaking. It is said that once, long ago, a war unfolded beneath the domes and bells of Rome, a war the world was never meant to remember. Not fought with swords or banners, not waged upon the fields of men, but within the quiet corridors of faith itself. The air, heavy with incense and candle smoke, carried not the cry of battle but the whisper of ideas, ideas that glimmered like sparks in a world that feared the fire. In the shadow of the Vatican's walls, where marble gleamed by day and shadows deepened by night, there lived those who dared to question the light. Scholars, monks, dreamers. Their quills trembled over parchment as they sought to touch something older, deeper, more infinite than doctrine. They wrote of creation as a spiral, not a line. They spoke of heaven not as a place above, but as a reflection within. Their words breathed with the pulse of stars, with the echo of mysteries that could not be contained within creed or crown. But truth, when it glows too brightly, casts a dangerous shadow, and so the church, ever guarding its heaven, began to sense the unrest below its altar stones, a movement of thought, quiet yet persistent like water beneath ice. It was the 16th century, an age when scripture met science, when observation brushed against revelation, when the boundaries of faith trembled in the hands of men who dared to see. By torchlight, inquisitors gathered. By candlelight, manuscripts were read and judged. Some were blessed, others condemned. It was decided in silence and in secrecy that words could be heresy, that ink could be rebellion, that a single sentence could unmake a kingdom of belief. And so, one night, the war began. It was not recorded in the papal ledgers. It was not sung in the hymns. It began in whispers, parchment smuggled through corridors hidden beneath robes and relics. In a small scriptorium near the Tiber, a group of scholars gathered beneath the symbol of an open eye. Their brotherhood unacknowledged, their names already half erased by fear. They called themselves Custodes Lucis, the keepers of light. They met in silence, speaking only in ink. Their writings told of divine order not as command but as harmony, of man as both dust and starlight. They believed the church had mistaken silence for obedience and obedience for faith. They believed that to seek the unknown was not rebellion, but reverence. Yet even silence has spies. Within the Vatican, a priest of noble birth had begun to notice the absence of certain texts from the archives, the faint smell of burning wax near forbidden shelves. He traced the clues like a confessor chasing sin, and when he found them, the keepers of light, he wept, not for their blasphemy, but for what he knew must come next. The order was swift. Before dawn, soldiers of the Holy Office surrounded the scriptorium. The sky was a bruised violet, the air thick with the promise of rain. Inside, the scholars gathered their manuscripts, their eyes calm but shining with something close to peace. They had known this would come. They had written for the future, not the present. For those who would one day listen without fear. One of them, the youngest, took a single parchment, their final work, and sealed it within a small tube of copper. As the soldiers pounded on the door, he ran to the chapel nearby to a statue of St. Jerome carved in marble. There, beneath its hollow base, he placed the scroll, his trembling hand brushing the saint's feet as though asking for forgiveness. Outside, torches flickered in the rain. When the soldiers entered, they found only manuscripts piled upon the floor, their ink still wet. With the word of heaven on their lips, they set them alight. Fire took the pages first, then the air, smoke curling like black prayers into the rafters. The smell of burning vellum mingled with incense. Flames reflected in the eyes of the watchers, and for a moment it seemed the saints themselves wept through the painted glass. By sunrise, nothing remained but ash and silence. The scholars were taken. The church wrote their names in the margin of history, then crossed them out. The records speak of plague that year, not purging, of repentance, not rebellion. But those who walk the archives in Rome, those who have learned to listen to silence, know that the war did not end. It simply changed its shape. Whispers tell that beneath the Vatican library, where the air grows colder with each descending step, There exists a sealed chamber, its door carved with symbols the church no longer translates. Inside, they say, lie fragments of those forbidden manuscripts, pages that survived the flame, words written in a language both sacred and human, both remembered and lost. Some claim the church kept them as trophies, evidence of victory over heresy. Others say they were preserved out of quiet reverence by those who understood that even forbidden truth is still truth. And so the war became invisible. It moved from parchment to thought, from words to silence, from silence to dream. Priests read between lines of scripture. Artists painted eyes that saw too much. Poets whispered faith in ways that could not be condemned. The world turned, empires crumbled. The Vatican stood, and still beneath its sanctuaries, the echo of that forgotten war lingered like smoke beneath stone. Centuries later, a restoration worker repairing the statue of St. Jerome found something strange. A faint hollow sound when his hammer touched the base. Curiosity guided his hand, and beneath the marble he found the copper tube, darkened by time but unbroken. Inside, a single parchment. The words were faint, water-stained, but legible. It began not with a creed but with a question. If truth is divine, why must it fear the light? No name signed it. No seal marked it. Only a single symbol, an open eye surrounded by rays. The worker, unsure what he had found, took it to his superior, who took it to the Vatican library. There it remains, catalogued under no official record, known only by a code, Codex Obscura 17-3. Few are permitted to see it. Fewer still dare to speak of it. Those who have whisper that the writing feels alive, that under certain light the ink seems to breathe, that the words themselves shift, refusing to settle into one meaning. Some believe it was blessed, others say it was cursed, but the oldest among the archivists say only this: some truths are not meant to be understood, only remembered, and so the war continues. Not with soldiers or flame, but in the quiet heart of every seeker who questions, every believer who wonders, every dreamer who listens beyond the walls of doctrine. The Vatican's bells still toll each morning, their sound pure, unwavering. Yet beneath that harmony lies another note, lower, softer, almost imperceptible. The echo of words never allowed to breathe, perhaps. If one stands beneath the dome at twilight and listens closely, one can still hear it. The faint crackle of pages that no longer exist. The sigh of ink turned to dust. The hum of thought refusing to die. For wars of the spirit do not end with victory. They fade, they sleep, they wait. And sometimes in the spaces between prayer and silence they wake again, as if to remind us that faith and doubt were never enemies at all. Only reflections of the same endless search for light. Perhaps that is why the church never recorded this war. Because it was never truly over. It still breathes, softly, invisibly, in every question that dares to rise, in every truth that waits, patient and eternal, beneath the ash of burned pages and the shadow of the cross. It is said that in the age when stars were still seen as scripture, there lived in Rome a man who dared to read them otherwise. He was neither priest nor prophet, though he spoke to heaven more faithfully than most. His name was whispered only in quiet rooms, written in letters that never reached their destination, sealed with wax and fear. Some called him an astronomer, others a heretic. But in truth, he was only a man who could not stop looking up. Each night, when the bells of the Vatican had stilled and the streets below grew soft with sleep, he climbed the narrow steps to his observatory, a modest tower of stone and silence. There, beneath a dome that creaked in the wind, he lit his single candle. The flame trembled against the cold glass of his telescope. And as the city below sank into darkness, he turned his gaze to the forbidden sky. It was not the same sky the church had mapped. Theirs was a firmament of perfection, immutable and divine, stars fixed in eternal praise, planets circling Earth as if in devotion. But what he saw was motion, drift, and wonder. He saw the planets wandering like pilgrims, tracing paths that disobeyed the holy order. He saw that the heavens were not centered upon man, but upon something vast and nameless, something neither bound by creed nor captured by scripture. And as he watched, night after night, the boundaries of faith and fact began to blur. His ink-stained fingers trembled as he wrote what the stars confessed. The parchment filled with circles and spirals, with numbers that whispered of an infinite design, one too wide, too wild, for the comfort of heaven's hierarchy. He wrote not to defy, but to understand, not to mock creation but to meet it. Still, it was said that even the most careful prayer could not disguise the tremor of revelation. Rumors began to rise like smoke through the city. That a man was watching the heavens in ways unblessed. That he had written the unthinkable, the earth moves. The phrase carried weight like sin. To say it aloud was to tilt the cosmos, to suggest that even divine geometry could be flawed. The church, whose power rested upon the stillness of heaven, began to listen, and yet he continued. For how could he stop? The stars had become his confessional, the sky his scripture. Each constellation felt like a secret passed from creation itself. He traced Orion's belt not as a hunter's blade but as a line of longing. He followed Jupiter's moons, saw their tiny orbits like celestial prayers circling a brighter truth. But the greater his awe, the deeper his fear, for he knew what awaited those who found beauty beyond permission. He had seen the faces of men burned not for their sins but for their discoveries, and so he began to write in code. His journals became a labyrinth of symbols and metaphors. The orbit of Mars disguised as a psalm, the tilt of the earth hidden within a hymn. It is said that one night he dreamt of a single star, brighter than the rest, trembling at the edge of the known heavens. When he woke, he could not find it again. He marked it in his charts anyway, a lone point of light he called Anima Caeli, the soul of the sky. The church's maps never named it. Some said it vanished because heaven had hidden it, others because he had seen too much. As his discoveries grew, so did the eyes upon him. A young priest, curious and afraid, was sent to visit his observatory. The astronomer welcomed him kindly, offering wine and quiet conversation. Together, they watched the moon rise like a pale coin through the telescope. "Does it not move you?" the astronomer whispered, "to see God's creation turning, alive, imperfect, and infinite?" The priest said nothing. His eyes reflected both wonder and warning. Days later, the astronomer was summoned to stand before the tribunal. In the vast hall of marble and shadow, he bowed before the cardinals. They spoke not in anger, but in sorrow. To them he had trespassed upon heaven. To them his telescope was a gate through which faith might escape. He listened in silence. The light from the stained glass windows fell across his face like judgment. When asked if he would recant, he did not answer. Instead, he lifted his eyes toward the domed ceiling, painted with stars that never moved. And softly, almost as a prayer, he said, "The earth turns, your eminences, whether I believe it or not." It was not defiance. It was truth, spoken like a sigh. The church silenced him soon after. Some say he was imprisoned, others that he was sent away, his writings confiscated, his instruments dismantled. But in the years that followed, whispers persisted, of a telescope left standing in an empty tower, still pointed toward the heavens, unmoved and unforgotten. And there, through centuries of dust and silence, it remained. Those who dared to climb the crumbling stairs said the air within the observatory felt different. Thinner, colder, filled with the faint scent of smoke and wax. The telescope, though cracked and ancient, still faced the same place in the night sky. A region of darkness where no star was charted. The missing star. Anima Caeli, no one knows if it ever existed. Perhaps it was nothing more than a trick of the atmosphere, a momentary shimmer in the eye of a sleepless man. Yet some say that when the night is clear, and one looks through the glass of that forgotten telescope, they see a faint glimmer, not of a star, but of something listening back. It is said that the church erased his name from the records, yet could not erase his question. That every astronomer since, in some quiet way, continues his prayer, that endless yearning to know what lies beyond the boundaries of doctrine and dream. Even now, in the great observatories of the modern world, when the last astronomer of the night leans close to the eyepiece and breathes upon the lens, it is as though the past breathes with him, as though that ink-stained man still watches, still wonders, still waits for the vanished star to return. Perhaps it never left. Perhaps it simply moved beyond the maps, beyond the reach of decree, into a silence so vast that even heaven must listen. For truth, like light, cannot be owned. It bends, it travels, it endures, and though the man who watched it was silenced, the sky above him was not. Tonight it still burns, vast and unblinking, a cathedral of fire and distance, where every star is both question and answer, every darkness a doorway, and somewhere in that endless expanse, A single light trembles in the soul of the sky, waiting for the eyes that once found it and the faith that dared to follow it home. No one knows exactly what he read, only that when the other archivists found him hours later, the scroll lay open beside him, and he had not spoken since. His eyes were open, clear, unbroken, but turned inward, as though seeing something that could not be returned. The scroll was resealed, placed within a glass case and marked simply non-legatur. Do not read. Yet even sealed it hummed. Those few permitted to study its exterior wrote of strange sensations. A faint warmth beneath the fingertips, a pressure in the chest like the moment before a storm. Some claimed they heard faint whispering, syllables without meaning or perhaps meanings without words. In time, the church concluded the scroll was apocryphal, likely Gnostic, perhaps heretical. They logged it quietly, stored it beneath the archive's lowest vault, and spoke of it no more. But the whispers persisted. Years later, one scholar, an expert in pre-Christian mysticism, was granted limited access to examine it again. She noticed something others had overlooked. Between the curling lines of text were faint symbols, resembling wings, drawn not with ink but with pressure as though pressed from beneath the parchment rather than upon it. She began to suspect the scroll was not written about angels but by them. The text, what little she could reconstruct, told of beings who did not fall through pride, but through obedience. Angels who descended not because they defied the divine, but because they fulfilled its unspoken will. They were sent to bring light into the depths, to dwell among the unformed places of creation, yet were forgotten when they did not return. Their fall was not rebellion, it was sacrifice. And heaven, in its silence, chose never to remember them. The scroll spoke of a covenant beyond Scripture, of light buried within shadow, of divinity concealed within decay. It suggested that holiness itself was not purity, but the courage to enter imperfection. A truth too deep, too human, to ever be sanctified. If this was true, it would mean that heaven's first act of creation was also its first act of forgetting. When the scholar reached that passage, she wept, not from fear, but from recognition. She closed the scroll carefully and requested it be sealed once more. She never published her notes. Not long after, her writings were confiscated, her name erased from the Vatican's academic record. Only one phrase survived in the margins of her final letter. To know the beginning is to end the story of heaven. No one has spoken of the scroll since. But in 1971, a faint tremor passed through the archives. The result, they said, of construction in the catacombs. Yet the archivists who were there recall something stranger. That as the shelves rattled, a faint tearing sound echoed through the vaults as though parchment itself were being unrolled somewhere in the dark. They followed the sound to the sealed cabinet. Its glass was cracked from within. The seal of wax, the circle and downward line, had split in two. Inside, the scroll lay open once again. The letters had changed. Where once there were words, there were now only faint streaks of silver like starlight pressed into paper. It is said that those who looked upon it too long began to dream of falling, not downward but inward into a light too vast to bear. Some woke weeping, some never woke at all, and so it was sealed again, this time not in glass but in lead, the chamber itself walled off and forgotten. Still, the rumor endures that every few decades when the Vatican conducts its secret restorations, archivists hear the faint sound of tearing paper, echoing through the stone corridors like the slow breath of something ancient. Perhaps the scroll is not meant to be read because it is not text but memory, the memory of a truth too sacred for doctrine, too vast for belief. Perhaps it was written by hands that no longer exist for eyes not yet born. Or perhaps it was never meant to be found at all. In the end, it rests where no light reaches, wrapped once more in silence. But those who have heard its whisper say that even sealed it breathes, a slow, steady rhythm beneath the marble floors of the Holy City. And when night falls over Rome and the bells of the Vatican toll the final hour, some claim to hear it again, that faint, impossible sound like the slow tearing of parchment, as though truth itself were folding back into shadow, hiding once more from those who would name it. It is said that in a small chapel, Hidden among the cypress hills outside Florence, there lies a wall that dreams. By daylight it seems unremarkable, pale plaster, uneven with age, carrying only the faint echo of color beneath its skin. But when dusk comes and the last beam of sun touches its surface, something stirs beneath the white. Shapes begin to breathe through the plaster. Colors, soft as memory, whisper to the eye before fading once more into silence. The chapel itself is forgotten. Its bell tower no longer rings. Moss climbs the steps, ivy curls across the stone, and the air smells faintly of dust and oil, as if the ghost of paint still lingers, waiting to dry. Few visit, fewer still remember. But those who do speak, of a presence that lingers there, patient unseen, like a prayer that never ended. It was here centuries ago that a painter once worked, a man whose name the church erased, though his hand, they say, could make heaven weep. He was born in an age when art was worship, when brushstrokes were theology, and beauty itself was bound by decree. Painters were servants of vision, their colors confined to scripture, their light shaped by the shadow of dogma. But one night, while the painter worked alone by candlelight, something appeared to him. He did not speak of it. He did not write of it. He simply painted. Witnesses later claimed he had been changed after that night. He painted with a trembling devotion, as though translating something he himself did not yet understand. The walls of the chapel became his confession, each layer of pigment a prayer, each touch of gold a question. When at last his fresco was revealed, those who saw it fell silent, not because it lacked beauty, but because it held too much of it. It was said to show Christ not enthroned, but kneeling, not crowned, but bareheaded. His hands were not lifted, in judgment but open, palms upturned as if asking forgiveness from the very world he had come to save. The angels that surrounded him did not sing. They wept. Their faces, luminous, human, tender, were stained with tears that shimmered in the candlelight like dew upon marble. Even the sky above them seemed to bend downward, heavy with sorrow, as if heaven itself mourned what it could not change. The bishop who commissioned the work was horrified. "This is not the glory of God," he declared. But the painter, exhausted, only whispered, "It is the truth of him." And that was his undoing. The fresco was condemned. The church decreed that such a vision, one where divinity bore the full weight of humanity, was blasphemy disguised as beauty. They came at dawn with buckets of lime and plaster. The painter watched in silence as his masterpiece disappeared beneath layers of white, the scent of wet chalk mingling with the faint perfume of drying oils. He was ordered never to paint again. He obeyed, though not entirely. In secret, he returned to the chapel at night, carrying only a single candle. He would sit before the wall, that silent, entombed vision, and whisper to it, as if it were alive beneath its burial shroud. Sometimes he would touch the plaster, feeling for warmth. He swore that beneath his fingers he could feel the faint pulse of light, beating like a hidden heart. They say he died there, in that same chapel, one winter night. The candle burned to its end beside him. When they found his body, his hand still rested upon the wall, his fingers streaked faintly with color, gold and crimson, like the final echo of dawn. Centuries passed. The chapel fell into ruin. The fresco, sealed beneath its white cocoon, was forgotten by history, but the earth remembers what the church forgets. One summer, long after his name had turned to dust, restoration workers were sent to inspect the crumbling chapel. As they brushed away the plaster, a faint shimmer appeared beneath, the suggestion of a wing, the curve of a face. The lead restorer paused. The air around them felt charged as if filled with invisible breath. They continued carefully, layer by layer, until light began to bloom beneath their tools. First came the tears, tiny rivulets of blue and silver, still glistening after 400 years. Then the eyes of the angels, not triumphant but weary as though they had watched the centuries pass from behind their veil. And finally the Christ, humble, sorrowful, radiant in his humanity. Even fractured, even faded, the image glowed. The colors breathed again, though faintly, not as they once did, but enough to remind the world that beauty does not die when buried. It only learns to wait. The church no longer called it heresy. They called it a mystery, a relic of uncertain authorship, preserved in the name of art. But those who stood before it could feel something deeper, the pulse of truth that had survived both condemnation and time. It is said that when evening falls and the last light of day touches the fresco, the angels seem to shimmer, their tears gleaming as though wet once more. And for a moment one can almost hear the sound of a brush against plaster, steady and reverent, guided by faith too fragile to conform. Perhaps the painter saw wrongly, or perhaps he saw too well, saw that divinity was not a crown, but a wound shared with the world. And perhaps heaven too has always wept, quietly, endlessly, for those who dared to paint what it truly looked like. Now beneath the cracked plaster, color breathes, not bright, but eternal. A whisper of gold beneath white dust, a pulse beneath silence, it waits, patient as mercy, for the moment when light returns and the world remembers what was once too beautiful to be allowed to exist. It is said that the bell of St. Anselmo has no voice of its own, only the echo of the hands that once called heaven to listen. It hangs above the cloister still, darkened by centuries of smoke and rain, its bronze surface streaked with green, its clapper bound in silence. Pilgrims who stand beneath it swear they can feel something hum through the air, like a breath held too long. No one remembers who forged it. The records say only that it was cast during a storm that split the sky, and that when the final strike cooled, the thunder ceased. For generations it was the heart of the monastery. The pulse that summoned monks to prayer, marked death, announced morning. But the bell is not rung for more than 300 years, except once. The night it did, the moon was thin and pale. The city slept beneath a mist so heavy it swallowed the rooftops. Inside St. Anselmo the corridors stretched dark and endless, and only one light remained, a candle flickering before the statue of a weeping saint. Then came the sound, a single toll, deep, slow, so heavy it seemed to bend the air. It rolled down the hill, through the olive groves across the sleeping town. Windows rattled, dogs howled, some said the earth itself trembled. Those awake at that hour spoke later of a vibration that entered their bones, a sound that was not merely heard, but felt as though the world itself had been struck. When the priests rushed to the tower, they found the ropes coiled neatly. No wind, no tremor, no one inside. Yet the bell still swayed, gently as if remembering the motion of unseen hands. By dawn, word spread through the town. The people gathered at the gates, whispering of omens and angels, of saints announcing judgment. The abbot ordered silence. He declared it a mechanical fault, nothing more. Yet his voice shook as he said it, for he knew the mechanism had long been sealed. That morning, a scribe was sent to the Vatican archives to deliver a decree, one meant to be preserved forever. But by evening it was gone. Not misplaced, not stolen. Gone as if it had never been written. The ink, the parchment, even the memory of its words, erased from every copy, every record. Only the title remained in the registry, followed by a blank space. No one spoke of it again. The bell was bound, its clapper locked with iron and sealed with wax. The tower was closed. The monks avoided it, claiming they sometimes heard a low resonance in the walls, a sound that made their hearts slow and their breath falter. Some nights candles in the chapel guttered without wind. Others swore they heard faint voices, not chanting, not praying, but whispering as though time itself were trying to remember something forbidden. Years passed. The monastery aged. Stone wore smooth beneath the feet of pilgrims long dead. The bell tower sank a little each winter, the metal within turning darker, heavier. But one night each century, on no calendar known to man, the air above St. Anselmo trembles. Birds scatter from the trees. The sea far below the cliffs goes still. Then comes a single distant note, low, mournful, and endless. Some call it the wind through the tower. Others, the voice of the past refusing to sleep. A few claim it tolls to erase what must not be remembered. A decree, a secret, a truth too dangerous for history. Those who have heard it say the sound does not fade. It lingers in the chest behind the ribs, humming like an invisible thread, and when silence finally returns, it feels thinner than before, as though the world itself is holding its breath. Now the bell hangs unmoving again, its mouth open toward the sky. No one dares to climb the tower. No one dares to speak its name after dusk. But if you stand near the monastery at midnight, when the fog gathers thick around the stones and the stars hide their eyes, you might hear something faint beneath the stillness, a single vibration in the dark, deep as the earth and soft as memory, ringing from a time that has not yet ended. Perhaps it is only the wind, or perhaps it is the bell of St. Anselmo, still tolling beyond time, for something the world was never meant to remember. It is said that beneath Rome, where the air turns to whisper and the earth hums with memory, there are paths not marked on any map, paths where even the lantern light dares not linger, and prayers decay into dust before they are heard. In the year 1247, on a night when the Tiber ran black with rain, a woman descended into those tunnels. Her name was never written, her face never carved. The chronicles call her only the pilgrim who went below. Some claim she was a heretic, a seeker of a truth Rome had forbidden to speak. Others that she was sent by the church itself, chosen to walk where no priest would tread. There are those who whisper she was neither condemned nor blessed, but called. She carried with her only a torch, a vial of oil, and a prayer she did not speak aloud. The entrance was hidden behind an abandoned chapel, its altar cracked, its frescoes eaten by mildew. The rain followed her down the first steps, then stopped. Beneath there was no sound, only the slow dripping of water and the echo of her own heartbeat. The catacombs opened before her like a throat of stone, swallowing her torchlight inch by inch. The walls were carved with crosses, circles, and names, each letter softened by centuries. But as she moved deeper, the markings changed. First, the faces of saints became indistinct. Then older symbols emerged, spirals, suns, eyes carved with impossible precision. And among them, one image repeated again and again, a woman with open palms, a circle behind her head, a child cradled against her chest. It was not the Virgin the church spoke of. It was something older, a mother not of heaven but of the earth itself. The deeper she went, the warmer the air grew, thick with the scent of iron and incense long extinguished. Her torch sputtered and shadows began to move as if breathing. At one turn she found bones stacked in perfect spirals. At another, a wall painted in a red that looked too alive to be pigment. Scholars who later tried to follow her steps found that no such passages existed. But in the oldest maps of Rome's underworld, those kept in the Vatican's forbidden vaults, there is a blank space marked only with a faint inked circle, and beside it a single word, Mater. It is said she began to hum as she walked, a low tune without words. The catacombs answered, the echoes folding upon themselves until her song seemed sung by many. She touched the walls as she went, tracing the carvings with reverent fingers as though each stone were a verse in a sacred text. Hours passed, or perhaps centuries. Time does not move the same beneath the earth. At last she reached a chamber the size of a chapel, its air dry as ash. In its center stood an altar of black stone, smooth and untouched by moss or decay. On its surface rested nothing, only dust, and the faint imprint of two hands. The torch was nearly gone. She placed it on the ground, its flame trembling as though afraid to die. Then she knelt. No one knows what she saw, but when the last of the light faded, witnesses above, monks in the chapel above the sealed stairs, reported feeling the ground shudder once, gently as though something vast had exhaled. A whisper of gold beneath white dust, a pulse beneath silence. It waits, patient as mercy, for the moment when light returns and the world remembers what was once too beautiful to be allowed to exist. It is said that the bell of St. Anselmo has no voice of its own, only the echo of the hands that once called heaven to listen. It hangs above the cloister still, darkened by centuries of smoke and rain, its bronze surface streaked with green, its clapper bound in silence. Pilgrims who stand beneath it swear they can feel something hum through the air, like a breath held too long. No one remembers who forged it. The records say only that it was cast during a storm that split the sky, and that when the final strike cooled, the thunder ceased. For generations it was the heart of the monastery. The pulse that summoned monks to prayer, marked death, announced morning. But the bell is not rung for more than 300 years, except once. The night it did, the moon was thin and pale. The city slept beneath a mist so heavy it swallowed the rooftops. Inside St. Anselmo, the corridors stretched dark and endless, and only one light remained, a candle flickering before the statue of a weeping saint. Then came the sound, a single toll, deep, slow, so heavy it seemed to bend the air. It rolled down the hill, through the olive groves, across the sleeping town. Windows rattled, dogs howled. Some said the earth itself trembled. Those awake at that hour spoke later of a vibration that entered their bones, a sound that was not merely heard, but felt as though the world itself had been struck. When the priests rushed to the tower, they found the ropes coiled neatly. No wind, no tremor, no one inside. Yet the bell still swayed, gently, as if remembering the motion of unseen hands. By dawn, word spread through the town. The people gathered at the gates, whispering of omens and angels, of saints announcing judgment. The abbot ordered silence. He declared it a mechanical fault, nothing more. Yet his voice shook as he said it, for he knew the mechanism had long been sealed. That morning, a scribe was sent to the Vatican archives to deliver a decree, one meant to be preserved forever. But by evening it was gone. Not misplaced, not stolen. Gone as if it had never been written. The ink, the parchment, even the memory of its words, erased from every copy, every record. Only the title remained in the registry, followed by a blank space. No one spoke of it again. The bell was bound, its clapper locked with iron and sealed with wax. The tower was closed. The monks avoided it, claiming they sometimes heard a low resonance in the walls, a sound that made their hearts slow and their breath falter. Some nights candles in the chapel guttered without wind. Others swore they heard faint voices, not chanting, not praying, but whispering as though time itself were trying to remember something forbidden. Years passed. The monastery aged. Stone wore smooth beneath the feet of pilgrims long dead. The bell tower sank a little each winter, the metal within turning darker, heavier. But one night each century, on no calendar known to man, the air above St. Anselmo trembles. Birds scatter from the trees. The sea far below the cliffs goes still. Then comes a single distant note, low, mournful, and endless. Some call it the wind through the tower. Others, the voice of the past refusing to sleep. A few claim it tolls to erase what must not be remembered. A decree, a secret, a truth too dangerous for history. Those who have heard it say the sound does not fade. It lingers in the chest, behind the ribs, humming like an invisible thread, and when silence finally returns, it feels thinner than before, as though the world itself is holding its breath. Now the bell hangs unmoving again, its mouth open toward the sky. No one dares to climb the tower. No one dares to speak its name after dusk. But if you stand near the monastery at midnight, when the fog gathers thick around the stones and the stars hide their eyes, you might hear something faint beneath the stillness, a single vibration in the dark, deep as the earth and soft as memory, ringing from a time that has not yet ended. Perhaps it is only the wind, or perhaps it is the bell of St. Anselmo, still tolling beyond time, for something the world was never meant to remember. It is said that beneath Rome, where the air turns to whisper and the earth hums with memory, there are paths not marked on any map, paths where even the lantern light dares not linger, and prayers decay into dust before they are heard. In the year 1247, on a night when the Tiber ran black with rain, a woman descended into those tunnels. Her name was never written, her face never carved. The chronicles call her only the pilgrim who went below. Some claim she was a heretic, a seeker of a truth Rome had forbidden to speak. Others that she was sent by the church itself, chosen to walk where no priest would tread. There are those who whisper she was neither condemned nor blessed, but called. She carried with her only a torch, a vial of oil, and a prayer she did not speak aloud. The entrance was hidden behind an abandoned chapel, its altar cracked, its frescoes eaten by mildew. The rain followed her down the first steps, then stopped. Beneath there was no sound, only the slow dripping of water and the echo of her own heartbeat. The catacombs opened before her like a throat of stone, swallowing her torchlight inch by inch. The walls were carved with crosses, circles, and names, each letter softened by centuries. But as she moved deeper, the markings changed. First, the faces of saints became indistinct. Then older symbols emerged, spirals, suns, eyes carved with impossible precision. And among them, one image repeated again and again. A woman with open palms, a circle behind her head, a child cradled against her chest. It was not the Virgin the Church spoke of. It was something older, a mother not of heaven but of the earth itself. The deeper she went, the warmer the air grew, thick with the scent of iron and incense long extinguished. Her torch sputtered and shadows began to move as if breathing. At one turn she found bones stacked in perfect spirals. At another, a wall painted in a red that looked too alive to be pigment. Scholars who later tried to follow her steps found that no such passages existed. But in the oldest maps of Rome's underworld, those kept in the Vatican's forbidden vaults, there is a blank space marked only with a faint inked circle, and beside it a single word, mater. It is said she began to hum as she walked, a low tune without words. The catacombs answered, the echoes folding upon themselves until her song seemed sung by many. She touched the walls as she went, tracing the carvings with reverent fingers as though each stone were a verse in a sacred text. Hours passed, or perhaps centuries. Time does not move the same beneath the earth. At last she reached a chamber the size of a chapel, its air dry as ash. In its center stood an altar of black stone, smooth and untouched by moss or decay. On its surface rested nothing, only dust, and the faint imprint of two hands. The torch was nearly gone. She placed it on the ground, its flame trembling as though afraid to die. Then she knelt. No one knows what she saw, but when the last of the light faded, witnesses above, monks in the chapel above the sealed stairs, reported feeling the ground shudder once, gently as though something vast had exhaled. In the centuries since, explorers have searched for the chamber. Some returned empty-handed, others did not return at all. The catacombs, they said, changed their shape, corridors folding into new forms, paths leading back to where they began. A labyrinth alive with memory. There are faint records of a single relic recovered decades later, a fragment of cloth found near the lowest passages. It bore the faint outline of a woman's hand, pressed in ash, the fingers curled inward as if holding something invisible. The relic was brought to the archives. No one has seen it since, yet sometimes, when the Roman night is deep and the bells of the city sleep, the guards beneath St. Peter's claim to hear soft steps echoing in the tunnels. Not hurried, not lost measured, certain, a rhythm that keeps its own time, moving through stone corridors unseen. They say the air grows warm when it happens, and the oil lamps flicker without wind. And once, only once, a watchman reported hearing a woman's voice, faint as breath, singing a melody older than Latin. Perhaps she still walks, the unnamed pilgrim guarding what she found, or perhaps the catacombs themselves remember her. The torch, the song, the final kneeling before the altar that had waited since before Scripture was written. Beneath the marble and gold of the holy city, something still breathes. It is not darkness nor death. It is something awake, waiting, ancient as the stone, soft as prayer. And if you listen closely through the silence and the dust, you might hear it. The echo of her footsteps, still walking, still guarding. Beneath the city that forgot her name, it is said there once existed a gospel without a name, a scripture so old it carried no author, no blessing, no beginning. Those who claimed to have seen it spoke of ink that shimmered like dusk, of words that pulsed softly as though written not upon parchment but upon breath itself. They called it the gospel of the forgotten light. It was said to tell of a creation unlike the one taught from the pulpits, a world born not from light conquering darkness, but from the two entwined. It spoke of night as the womb of the divine, the place from which even the stars learned how to shine. But such a vision was dangerous, for it whispered of a faith that embraced the shadow instead of fearing it. The story begins in a monastery at the edge of the world, a place where mountains touch the clouds, and bells are heard only by those who believe. There, a small circle of monks lived by moonlight. They studied in silence, their candles dimmed to a flicker, so that the words they copied might remain unseen by passing eyes. It is said one of them possessed the fragments of that forbidden text, copied not by hand, but by heart. He wrote in margins, in psalms, in hidden spaces between accepted lines. The dark, one fragment reads, was not the absence of God, but his first breath. Each night as the world slept, the monks gathered in a chamber without icons. They spoke softly of the verses that could no longer be spoken aloud. They did not seek to defy heaven, only to understand it, to feel the pulse of creation in its fullness, not merely its glow. Their prayers were half whisper, half sigh, carried upward through the cracks of the old roof to the patient stars above. But word travels, even through silence. One winter, a messenger came from Rome, his robes heavy with rain and judgment. The abbot met him in the courtyard where frost had turned the stones white as bone. There were no accusations, no anger, only a request. The scroll, the messenger said, is not meant for mortal tongues. That night the monks gathered one last time. They brought the fragments, the fading vellum, the hidden ink, the words they had kept alive in secret. No one spoke as they laid them before the altar. The abbot wept quietly, his tears falling onto the script, blurring the line that read, "And in the darkness he saw himself and called it good. At dawn, they burned it." The smoke rose slowly, curling like hands in prayer. Yet as the flame consumed the parchment, something strange happened. The smoke did not blacken, but shimmered faintly with a pale silver hue. It hung in the air long after the fire had died, as if unwilling to fade. Some said it was a sign that the gospel had not been lost, only transfigured, that its words had returned to the element from which they were born. Years turned to centuries. The monastery crumbled, its stones swallowed by ivy, but travelers still speak of strange light among its ruins, a glow that moves with the wind, softer than flame, brighter than moonlight. Those who have seen it say it feels like being remembered by something vast and tender. Fragments of the gospel still appear, like whispers caught in the wrong century. A line hidden in a psalm, a verse carved into a forgotten chapel wall. A scholar in Venice once wrote that he dreamt of a voice reciting words he did not know, and when he woke, he found his candle burning with two flames. Perhaps it is still out there, not in ink, not in paper, but in the quiet spaces faith dares not name. For what if light was never meant to defeat the dark? What if they were never enemies but reflections, each carrying the other's secret within? When the world sleeps, when the lamps go out and the air turns silver with moonlight, perhaps that is when the gospel of the forgotten light still speaks. Not in words, but in stillness. Not in fire, but in the hush that comes after prayer. It does not promise salvation. It offers something gentler, an understanding that the holy need not be perfect. That truth may live where shadow and radiance embrace. That even what was buried for fear of blasphemy can still illuminate the soul. And so as night folds around us, we remember that ancient verse, mine, the one no one dared to keep. The light was born from the dark, and in returning, both were made whole. Perhaps that is the secret they tried to hide. That divinity is not brightness alone, but the quiet shimmer that lingers when darkness finally learns to love the light. And is said that beneath the grand stones of St. Peter's, far below the marble, sanctuaries and the gilded altars, there lies a door that no hand has turned in centuries. It stands in a corridor few remember, sealed behind walls that were meant to be eternal. Some say it leads to nothing. Others whisper that beyond it waits a chamber made not of relics or tombs, but of mirrors. Those who first built it called it Speculum Dei, the mirror of God. But the name was later struck from every record, as if reflection itself had become heresy. It was said to be a place of contemplation, a room where theologians, weary of their own words, would descend to sit in the company of silence. The mirrors were meant not for vanity, but for revelation. Polished bronze at first, then pure glass, each pane forged to capture the soul's true image, free of the masks worn in daylight. Only a few ever entered. Fewer still returned unchanged. Whispers tell of bishops who emerged pale and trembling, their robes damp with sweat, of saints who wept before their own reflections until the glass grew dim with breath. It is said that when one looked too long, the reflection began to move first, slower, wiser, unbound by flesh, and so the church sealed it, but still, the chamber waits. The tale begins with a torch descending a narrow stair, its flame bending in the damp air. The walls are slick, the smell of stone ancient. The torchlight flickers upon the sealed door, a slab of iron bearing no keyhole, only a faint engraving. Veritas interior, the truth within.